For 10 years, the most feared Alpha King in the Northern Realms had not slept, not even once. And on the night she was dragged into his chamber in chains, every witness expected another execution, another silent ending swallowed by the stone walls. Yet the moment her bare feet crossed the threshold, the impossible happened. The king's body stilled, his breath faltered, and before anyone could speak, before even the guards could draw steel, Kyle Varkai, the war-born monarch who had not closed his eyes in a decade, collapsed at her feet and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like death itself. No one moved. No one dared, because every soul in that chamber knew the same truth. If the king slept, he died. And yet he did not. He remained there, unmoving, his chest rising slowly, peacefully, as if untouched by the curse that had devoured every second of his rest for 10 long years. And beneath him, the girl silent, shackled, sold like nothing more than livestock, stood frozen, her pulse steady, her breathing calm, her presence wrong. That was the moment the kingdom began to fracture. But long before the night the king fell asleep, she had already been broken. They called her useless, wolfless, a defect born under a cursed moon. Leora had no memory of her parents, no lineage to claim, no scent that marked her as belonging to any pack worth naming. And in a world where strength was measured in the power of one's wolf, she was nothing more than a hollow body walking among predators, tolerated only because she could scrub floors and carry water without complaint. Her silence mistaken for obedience, her endurance mistaken for emptiness. And every day she lived within the lower ranks of the Iron Fang pack, she was reminded again and again that she did not belong. The humiliation was never quiet. It came in laughter when she stumbled beneath heavy loads, in sharp words when she failed to anticipate a command, in careless cruelty, when nobles passed her in the corridors and wrinkled their noses at her scentless existence, as if she were something unfinished, something that should have died before it ever drew breath. And the worst of it came from those who feared what they could not understand, the noble women, the daughters of alphas, who saw in her something unsettling, something that refused to break no matter how often it was struck. So they broke her in public. They dragged her into the training courtyard on the day of the blood ceremony, when young wolves proved their strength before the gathered court, when dominance was displayed and hierarchy reaffirmed, and they forced her to stand in the center of the circle beneath the watchful gaze of nobles, warriors, and the Alpha himself. Though Kyle Varkai did not truly see her, not then, not yet. "Shift," one of the noblewomen commanded, her voice dripping with mockery, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of failure. Leora said nothing. She could not shift. She never had. "Shift," the woman repeated, louder now, for the crowd, for the spectacle, for the laughter waiting to erupt. And when Leora remained still, hands clenched at her sides, eyes lowered, but unbroken, the first ripple of amusement spread through the court. A guard struck her from behind. She fell to her knees. "Shift," they demanded again. But something strange happened then. No transformation, not a surge of power. Something far more subtle and far more terrifying. The air shifted. It was slight, so slight, most would not have noticed. But those closest to her felt it, a strange stillness pressing outward from her body, as if the world itself paused to listen. And for a single heartbeat, the torches flickered, their flames bending inward rather than outward, as though drawn toward her unseen center. Then, it was gone, and the laughter returned. They called it a trick, a fluke, a useless anomaly from a broken girl. And so the punishment continued. She was beaten, dragged through the dirt, her failure displayed before the entire court, until even the spectators lost interest, until she was nothing more than another reminder of what weakness looked like in a kingdom built on power. And when it ended, when she was thrown back among the servants, bloodied and silent, no one noticed the way her heart continued to beat, steady, rhythmic, unchanged, not faster, not weaker, unchanged. As if something within her refused to react to pain, as if something within her was waiting. Days passed, then weeks, and the anomaly began to follow her. Small at first, barely noticeable, a cup slipping from someone's hand, but never breaking when it struck near her feet. A restless wolf calming the moment she entered a room, the uneasy quiet that settled around her when tempers flared, as if her presence smothered chaos without effort, without intent. And still, no one understood. Until the night the traders arrived. They came under royal decree, bearing slaves from the southern warfront, offering bodies in exchange for coin and favor, and among them, Leora stood once more chained, silent, stripped of even the minimal protection of the Iron Fang pack, sold not because she was valuable, but because she was not. A defect was easier to discard than to kill, and so she was taken, transported across frozen lands to the capital where the Alpha King ruled, where Kael Varkai had waged war without rest, without sleep, without mercy, his curse binding him to a waking nightmare, where every moment of unconsciousness brought death closer, feeding on his mind, devouring his sanity, forcing him to remain alert, always, forever, until her, when she was brought before him, dragged across the obsidian floor, forced to kneel among other offerings. Something in the air shifted again, but this time, it did not pass unnoticed. Kael felt it. For the first time in 10 years, he felt something other than exhaustion. It struck him without warning. Apul, a quiet, a silence inside his mind where the curse had always whispered, always clawed, always demanded awareness, and before he could resist it, before he could understand it, his body gave in. He fell, straight down, at her feet, and the court erupted into chaos. Blades were drawn. Guards surged forward. The council shouted orders, panic cracking through their carefully controlled voices as they watched their king, unstoppable, untouchable, lie motionless before a slave girl, his breathing slow, his face peaceful. Peaceful. A word none of them had ever associated with him. Kill her, someone shouted, terror overtaking reason, because nothing else could explain what they were seeing. Nothing else could justify the impossible, and yet no one moved close enough to strike. Because the moment they did, the king's hand tightened. Even in sleep, even unconscious, power radiated from him, a silent warning, a command no one dared defy, and beneath that command, beneath that presence, Leora remained still, her chains cold against her skin, her gaze fixed not on the blades pointed toward her, but on the man who had collapsed at her feet. Her heart continued to beat, steady, rhythmic, unchanged, and something in the room responded to it. Not the wolves, not the guards, the curse. Though none of them could see it, though none of them could name it, something unseen recoiled from that rhythm, as if her very existence disrupted the force that had bound their king for a decade, and for the first time since the war began, Kael Varkai slept without dying. The council saw opportunity, the court saw danger, and the king, when he finally woke, would see her, not as a slave, not as a defect, but as the only thing standing between him and the madness waiting to consume him. And the moment he realized that, she would no longer belong to herself, because a king who had not slept in 10 years would do anything to keep the one person who could give him rest, even if it meant chaining her to his throne, even if it meant destroying her to survive. And somewhere beneath the surface of her quiet, beneath the steady rhythm of her impossible heart, something ancient stirred, something that had been waiting not for freedom but for him. When Kael Varkai opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not the ceiling of his chamber, nor the ring of terrified guards standing around him, nor the silver blades drawn in shaking hands. The first thing he saw was her. Leora stood where they had left her, wrists still chained, face bruised from a life that had never once been gentle. And yet, she looked at him with neither worship nor fear. She looked at him as if she had watched him fall from a great height and did not know whether to pity him or run. For one suspended moment, the entire chamber held its breath, and Kael realized with a cold shock that his mind was quiet. The curse that had clawed behind his eyes for 10 years had retreated like a starving beast forced into shadow. There was no whisper, no burning pressure, no endless command to remain awake or perish. Only the slow sound of her heartbeat. It was soft, almost impossible to hear beneath the armor, the breathing, the torches, but his wolf heard it, His soul heard it. A rhythm unlike any living thing he had ever known. Not fast with terror, not weak from pain. Deep, even ancient. Like a drum buried beneath the earth, before kingdoms were born. Kael rose slowly, and every guard stepped back. His black cloak slipped from one shoulder, revealing the war scars along his throat, scars that pulsed faintly with the dark sigils of the curse. "Who is she?" he asked. No one answered quickly enough. His gaze did not leave Leora. "I asked," he said, his voice low enough to make the torches tremble. "Who brought this girl to me?" The slave trader fell to his knees at once, stammering that she was nothing, a wolfless servant from the Ironfang territories, sold cheaply, unwanted, mute by choice or stupidity, no lineage, no wolf, no value. With every word, Kael's expression darkened, not with pity, but with calculation sharpened by something far more dangerous. Need. The council's eldest seer, Lord Vaelric, pushed forward through the guards, his pale robe sweeping across the stone like a burial cloth. He was old enough to remember the night the curse had first struck Kael on the battlefield, old enough to have buried 3 royal physicians and 2 moon priestesses who failed to break it. And when he looked at Leora, he did not see a slave. He saw an answer he could not control. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "she must be examined before she is allowed near you again." Kael turned his head. "Again?" The word fell like a blade. Vaelric lowered his eyes. "You slept." The chamber became deathly still. "For how long?" Kael asked. 7 minutes, Vaelric whispered. A murmur spread through the room before fear silenced it. 7 minutes. In 10 years, Kael had not survived 7 seconds of sleep without the curse, nearly tearing his spirit from his body. He had trained himself to stand through wounds, to rule through fever, to wage war while hallucinations crawled across the edges of his vision. But sleep had become a forbidden country, and now this beaten girl had opened its gates by merely existing in the same room. Lady Seraphine, the most beautiful noblewoman of the northern court, and the council's chosen bride for the king, stepped forward with poison hidden beneath silk. Her silver hair was braided with moonstones, her gown wide enough to make Leora's torn dress look even filthier by contrast. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "this may be a trap sent by the rival packs. No ordinary slave girl can do what she has done. She should be burned before her magic roots itself deeper." For the first time, Leora flinched. Not from the threat itself, but from the familiarity of being condemned before anyone asked whether she had chosen any of it. Kael saw that flinch. His jaw tightened. "She will not be burned." Seraphine's eyes sharpened, then chained elsewhere. Kael stepped closer to Leora, and the strange quiet within him deepened with every inch. "No." The word was final. "She remains where I can see her." Vaelric looked alarmed. "Majesty, dependence on an unknown force may be more dangerous than the curse itself." Kael's eyes remained on the girl. "Then let danger stand before me." He reached down, took the iron chain between his fingers, and snapped it as if it were thread. The sound cracked through the chamber. Leora's wrists dropped free, but freedom did not come with it. Kael leaned close enough for her to feel the cold power of him, the wolf beneath the man, the exhaustion beneath the crown. "You will stay in this palace," he said. "You will be guarded, fed, questioned, protected." Her lips parted, but no sound came. He paused, as if waiting for a voice that would not arrive. Then his tone lowered. "And you will never be harmed in my court again without my permission." It should have sounded like mercy. Instead, it sounded like a cage made of royal command. That night, they placed Leora in a chamber beside the king's own, not among servants, not among prisoners, but in the dangerous space between possession and protection. Fine linen covered the bed, silver basins gleamed with clean water, and a fire burned low in the hearth. Yet none of it eased the fear coiled in her chest. She had slept on straw most of her life. Softness felt like a trick. Food arrived untouched. A healer came to bind her bruises, but Leora watched every movement with silent suspicion. When the woman asked her name, she did not answer. When she asked whether Leora had magic, She did not answer. When she asked whether she knew why the king had fallen asleep at her feet, Leora looked toward the wall separating her chamber from his and placed one hand over her heart. It was beating normally. It had always beaten normally. Only now, the whole palace seemed to be listening. Beyond that wall, Kael stood alone before a mirror of blackened glass. The curse marks across his throat had dimmed for the first time since the war, fading from burning violet to bruised gray. He touched them with 2 fingers, then closed his eyes by instinct and immediately forced them open. Fear. Not of death in battle, not of betrayal, not of rebellion, but of sleep. The great Alpha King, feared by every pack from the Frost Mountains to the southern ashlands, was afraid to close his eyes. The shame of it burned worse than the curse. Then he heard it again, her heartbeat through the wall, slow, steady, calling not to his body, but to the broken place inside his mind. His wolf stirred, lowering its head as if before something older than dominance. Kael pressed his palm to the stone. On the other side, unseen, Leora did the same without knowing why. And for one impossible second, the wall between them felt thin as breath. But in the council chamber below, betrayal had already begun to take shape. Vaelric stood before the royal council, his hands folded, his voice grave. "The girl is not merely calming the curse," he said. "She is interfering with it. That means she is either a cure or a weapon designed to make the king vulnerable." Seraphine stood near the fire, eyes gleaming cold. "Then we test her." A commander in black armor, General Thorn, leaned forward. "If she can make him sleep, she can make him die." Seraphine smiled faintly. "Then we must discover which." No one spoke against her, not because they trusted her, but because every person in that room understood one thing. Whoever controlled the silent girl would control the king. And by dawn, Leora's life would no longer be measured by whether she was useful, but by whether she was too dangerous to remain alive. At dawn, the palace bells did not ring for worship or victory. They rang for an examination. Leora was led through the eastern corridors by 6 guards in black iron, though none of them dared touch her too roughly now, not after what had happened in the king's chamber. They kept their distance as if her silence were contagious, as if one wrong breath near her might bring the Alpha King to his knees again. Servants paused with buckets in their hands. Nobles watched from balconies behind carved screens. Every whisper followed her like a thrown stone. The slave girl who made the king sleep. The wolfless girl who bewitched the throne. The curse-bearer, the king's weakness. They brought her into the Hall of Moons, an ancient chamber built before the palace had walls, where the ceiling opened to the pale morning sky and silver circles were carved into the floor for blood rites, mate trials, and executions disguised as judgment. Lord Vaelric waited in the center with 3 moon priestesses, Lady Seraphine, General Thorn, and half the royal council. Kael was not there. That absence struck Leora harder than she expected. She hated that she noticed. She hated more that, without him in the room, every face looked hungry. "Step into the circle," Vaelric commanded. Leora did not move. Seraphine's smile was delicate and cruel. She understood chains better. A guard reached for Leora's arm, but before his fingers closed around her, the torches around the hall bent inward, flames thinning into blue spears that pointed directly at him. The guard froze. Leora froze too. She had not meant to do anything. She had not felt power move through her. She had only felt fear rise, and then the room had answered. Vaelric's eyes narrowed. "Interesting," he whispered. They forced her into the silver circle, without touching her again. A priestess cut her palm with a crescent blade and let 3 drops of blood fall onto the carved stone. The moment her blood touched the ancient marks, the floor did not glow silver like wolf blood should. It turned black. A gasp rolled through the hall. Seraphine stepped back. Vaelric went utterly still. Black light spread through the carvings like ink poured into veins, circling Leora's bare feet, climbing the old symbols, awakening lines that had not shone in centuries. The priestesses began chanting, but their voices shook. One of them stopped mid-word and stared at Leora with tears in her eyes, as if she had seen a ghost. "What is she?" General Thorne demanded. Valric did not answer, because he knew, or worse, he suspected. He raised a trembling hand and spoke a command in the dead royal tongue, the language of the first wolves, the language only bloodlines older than conquest could answer. Leora should not have understood it. She had never been taught letters, much less ancient speech. Yet the words struck her heart like a remembered lullaby. Kneel, daughter of the buried moon. Her knees nearly buckled. Not from command, from recognition. The black light surged. Far away, in his chamber, Cale woke from a brief and forbidden rest with a sound like a growl torn from the grave. He had not meant to sleep. He had been standing beside the window, listening to her heartbeat fading down the hall, fighting the urge to follow, when exhaustion finally took him for a single stolen moment. This time, the curse did not merely whisper. It screamed. Something was happening to her. Before the guards outside his door could react, Cale was already moving. In the Hall of Moons, Valric's voice hardened. Again, the priestesses chanted louder. Silver smoke rose from the floor, wrapping around Leora's ankles. Pain shot through her bones. Not ordinary pain. Old pain. Inherited pain. It felt as if the ritual were peeling away layers of a life that had never truly belonged to her. Searching beneath the slave, beneath the wolfless mask, beneath every name they had given her, and something beneath began to wake. Her heartbeat changed. For the first time in her life, it changed. The rhythm deepened until every wolf in the hall heard it. One by one, guards dropped to their knees, not in worship, but in instinctive submission. Their wolves recognized something their minds could not accept. Even General Thorne gripped the edge of the council table, fighting the pull with veins standing in his neck. Seraphine's face twisted with terror. "Stop this," she hissed. "Stop it now." Valric raised the blade again. "Not until we know what she is." The second cut never landed. The doors of the Hall of Moons exploded inward. Cale stood in the shattered archway, black cloak whipping behind him, eyes burning gold, every inch of him the Alpha King the world feared. The entire hall bowed beneath the force of his presence except Leora, who stood shaking in the silver circle with blood in her palm and darkness burning at her feet. Cale saw the blade. He saw her blood. Then he saw the black light. For one heartbeat, even he looked shaken. Then his wrath descended. Who gave the order? No one answered. Cale walked forward slowly, and with each step, the silver carvings beneath the floor cracked. Valric lowered his head, but not quickly enough. Cale seized him by the throat and lifted him from the ground, as if he weighed nothing. "I asked," Cale said, voice quiet enough to terrify. "Who gave the order to bleed what belongs under my protection?" Seraphine stepped forward, desperate to reclaim control. "Your Majesty, she is dangerous. The ritual proves it. Her blood answers forbidden marks. She is no servant girl." Cale turned his eyes to her. "And you thought I did not know there was more to her?" The words struck Leora strangely. He had known nothing. Yet he spoke as if her mystery were not a crime, as if her hiddenness did not make her monstrous. Valric gasped in Cale's grip. "Majesty, if she is what I fear, then she is tied to the old prophecy." The hall went silent. Cale did not release him. "Speak." Valric's face had gone pale. "Before the War of Hollow Sleep, before your curse was born, the Moonseers wrote of a bloodline erased from every royal record, a line whose heart could command silence over death itself. They called them the Nocturne Heirs." Leora's breath caught. Nocturne. She did not know the word, but her body did. The black light pulsed. Valric whispered, "If she carries that blood, then her heartbeat is not healing your curse. It is shielding you from the thing inside it." Kyle's hand tightened. "And why would that frighten you?" "Because the curse was made to kill kings in their sleep," Valric said. "But the nocturne blood was made to guard them." Seraphine's eyes flashed. "Or control them." Cale released Valric, who collapsed to the floor coughing. Then the king stepped into the silver circle. Every priestess cried out at once, "Majesty, no!" But Cale crossed the boundary. The moment he entered, the black light climbed his boots, then his legs, then surged toward the curse marks on his throat. He staggered. Leora instinctively reached for him. and the entire hall watched as the silent slave girl touched the Alpha King's chest with her bloodied hand. The effect was immediate. The curse marks vanished. Not faded. Vanished. For one impossible breath, Ko looked almost human. Tired beyond words. Young beneath the burden. Vulnerable in a way no one in that court had ever seen. Then the curse struck back. A shadow burst from his throat like smoke-given claws. It screamed without sound, lashing toward Leora's face, and Kyle moved before thought, pulling her behind him, taking the blow across his back. He dropped to one knee. The hall erupted. Guards rushed forward. Seraphine screamed for them to seize the girl. Rick shouted for the circle to be sealed, but Leora heard none of it. She was staring at Kale, at the king on one knee before her, at the man who had used his own body as a shield. No one had ever stepped between her and pain before. Something inside her broke open, not violently, not like rage, like a locked door finally remembering it had a key. Her heartbeat thundered once. The black light flared upward into the shape of a wolf, vast, luminous, crowned in shadow, its eyes silver as moonlit snow. It rose behind Leora, not as a beast of flesh, but as a spirit older than any pack in the north. Every wolf in the hall whimpered. Even Kale's wolf lowered its head. The spirit wolf looked down at Kyle, then at Leora, and for the first time since she had been dragged into his world, Leora spoke. One word. Enough. The shadow curse recoiled as if struck. The Hall of Moons went still. Her voice was soft, cracked from disuse, barely more than breath. Yet it carried through stone, blood, and bone. The silver circle shattered beneath her feet. The black light died. The spirit wolf dissolved into sparks of darkness that flowed back into her chest, and Leora collapsed before anyone could touch her. Kyle caught her, not as a king claiming a weapon, as a man terrified of losing the only peace he had ever known. For a moment, the court saw everything it was not meant to see. The Alpha King kneeling in broken silver, holding a bleeding slave girl against his chest, his face stripped of command, his arms locked around her as if the entire kingdom could burn before he let her fall. That was the thumbnail moment no one in the court would ever forget. The feared Alpha King on his knees, the wolfless girl glowing with forbidden blood, the shattered moon circle beneath them, and the whole royal court, watching the balance of power change. But Seraphine saw something else. She saw her future disappearing. She saw the throne turning toward a girl with no name, no title, no training, no claim, except the one thing Seraphine could never possess: Kyle's need. So when the guards hesitated, waiting for their king's command, Seraphine stepped backward into the shadows and gave General Thorne a look. Not now. Soon. Kyle carried Leora from the hall himself. No servant, no guard, no priestess. His cloak wrapped around her wounded body, his arms holding her with a carefulness that unsettled every watching noble. Whispers chased them through the corridors, but none dared follow too closely. The king's expression promised death to anyone who tried. When Leora woke, it was night again. She lay in a chamber warmer than any room she had ever known, beneath blankets soft enough to feel unreal. Her palm was bandaged. Her throat ached. Her body felt hollow, drained by whatever had risen from her blood. For several long moments, she did not move. Then she heard breathing beside the bed. Kale sat in a chair near the fire, still in armor, still awake, watching, no guarding. His eyes lifted the moment her fingers moved. "You spoke," he said. Leora looked away. The silence between them was different now. Before, it had been forced upon her by survival. Now it felt like a choice. She was not ready to surrender. Kale leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice lower than before. "Did you know?" She shook her head once. "The wolf behind you, the blood, the nocturne name." Again. She shook her head. He studied her, and for the first time, she saw not suspicion, but restraint. He had questions, hundreds. He could command them from her. He could summon Rick, bind her to another circle, cut answers from her flesh the way others had tried. Instead, he did nothing. That frightened her more. Mercy from powerful men was rarely free. "You should fear me," he said, as if hearing the thought behind her eyes. Her gaze returned to him. "I do," she whispered. His expression changed at the sound of her voice. Not softened exactly, but struck, as if he had expected silence forever, and found himself unprepared for the fragile truth of her speaking. "Good," he said. "Fear keeps people alive." Leora's eyes lowered to the curse marks creeping faintly back along his throat. They were not as dark as before, but they had returned. He followed her gaze. "It came back when you fainted. Does it hurt?" The question surprised them both. Cale looked at her for a long moment. "Always." That single word filled the chamber with more honesty than any royal speech. Always. Not sometimes. Not only in battle. Always. Leora understood pain that did not leave. Pain that became a room one lived inside. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the exhaustion beneath his power, the bruised shadows under his eyes, the discipline it took for him merely to remain seated without shaking. "You slept again," she said. His jaw tightened. "For less than a minute, and you did not die." "No. Because of me?" The fire cracked softly. Cale's answer came slowly. "Yes." The word should have given her power. Instead, it felt like a chain placed gently around her throat. He saw that too. "I will not pretend this does not bind us," he said. "It does. Whatever you are, whatever I am cursed to carry, your heart shields me from it. But I will not let them carve you open for answers again." Leora wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. "You said I belong under your protection," she whispered. "Not that I belong to you." Kyle went still. The distinction hung between them like a blade. Then, very quietly, he said, "You are right." No one had ever said that to her. No alpha. No noble. No master. Cale rose and walked to the window, as if distance were the only thing keeping him from saying something reckless. Snow moved beyond the glass in pale sheets. The palace below looked carved from bone and night. "When the curse took me," he said, "I was 23. We were at war with the Ashen Vale. My father had just died. My council wanted surrender. I chose battle. I won before dawn." His hand tightened against the stone frame. "Then I slept in my tent for the first time as king. And every man in that camp heard me screaming." Leora sat up slowly despite the ache in her body. "The curse fed on consciousness," Cale continued. "The seers said, 'Sleep opened the door.' If I crossed fully, something would enter through me and devour the throne from within. So I stopped sleeping. One day, then 2, then a month, then years. The curse weakened when I remained awake. But my mind..." He stopped. "You started losing yourself," she whispered. He looked back at her. Yes, there it was, the center of him, hidden beneath crown and command. Not cruelty, not entirely. Desperation. A man holding back a monster with nothing but will. Leora should have felt pity. Instead, she felt the first dangerous thread of connection pulled tight between them. Cale felt it too. His wolf rose behind his eyes, gold flickering in the dark. For a moment, the air warmed. Leora's heartbeat shifted, not loudly, not magically, but with awareness. His gaze dropped to her chest, then snapped away with visible restraint. "I should leave," he said. "Because of the curse? Because I want to stay." The words entered the room like forbidden magic. Leora forgot how to breathe. Cale turned toward the door, but before he reached it, the torches in the chamber dimmed. A shadow moved beneath the bed, not cast by fire, not shaped by anything living. Leora saw it first. Her blood went cold. Cale. It was the first time she spoke his name. He turned instantly. The shadow lunged. Not at him. At her. Cale crossed the room in a blur, but the shadow was faster. A black hand rising from the floor and closing around Leora's ankle. Pain shot through her body as the curse tried to drag her downward, not into the floor but into sleep, into the same dark country it had used to hunt Cale for 10 years. She screamed. Cale seized her hand. The moment their fingers locked, her heartbeat thundered through them both. And suddenly, they were no longer in the chamber. They stood on a battlefield beneath a dead moon. Bodies covered the snow. A younger Kyle knelt in blood, crownless, shaking, while a woman in black robes carved a curse into his throat with a bone blade. Around them stood men wearing council rings, royal council rings. Leora turned slowly, horror rising through her. Kyle had said the curse came from war, but the vision showed the truth. It had not been cast by an enemy. It had been placed on him by his own court. The battlefield dissolved the moment the truth revealed itself, yet the feeling did not leave them. It clung to their bones like frost that would not melt, like a memory that refused to fade even after the vision shattered and the chamber returned. Leora gasped as the air rushed back into her lungs, her fingers still locked with Kael's, her body trembling from the force of what she had seen, while he stood utterly still, his grip tightening just enough to anchor himself to something real. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, because there were no words strong enough to hold what had just been uncovered. It had not been war. It had not been an enemy. The curse that had devoured 10 years of his life had been given to him by those who now knelt in his court. Kael released her hand slowly, as though afraid that if he let go too quickly, the truth would vanish, and he would be left again with the lie he had lived inside for a decade. His jaw tightened, the faint glow of the curse flickering along his throat as if it sensed the shift in his awareness, as if it feared being named. "They said it was the Ashen Veil," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "They said I was struck in my sleep, that no one saw who cast it." Leora's voice was soft, unsteady, but no longer silent. "You saw who cast it." His eyes closed for a fraction of a second, dangerous, instinctive, and when they opened again, something inside them had hardened into something colder than before. Not rage, not yet. Something sharper. Understanding. "The council," he said. The word did not echo in the room, but it might as well have shattered the walls. Before either of them could move further, the chamber doors burst open again, not with the controlled urgency of guards, but with violence disguised as duty. General Thorne entered first, armor dark as night, flanked by a dozen soldiers whose expressions held none of the hesitation the earlier guards had shown. These men had already made a choice. Behind them, Lady Seraphine stepped in, her face composed, her voice calm enough to hide the storm beneath it. "Your Majesty," she said, inclining her head just enough to show respect, but not enough to show submission. "Forgive the intrusion. The council requests the girl be moved to a more secure location." Kael did not turn. Denied. The word fell like iron. Seraphine's eyes flickered, but her smile remained. "You misunderstand. This is not a request." Kael rose to his full height then, slowly, deliberately, and when he turned, the air in the chamber thickened with the full force of his dominance. Every soldier stiffened. Even Thorne's hand hovered closer to his blade without realizing it. "I do not misunderstand," Kael said quietly. "You are the one forgetting your place." The tension snapped tight. Leora felt it before it broke. The moment stretched too long, too still. Then Thorne moved. It was fast, faster than any ordinary strike. But Kael was already in motion, intercepting the blade before it reached her. Steel clashed against steel, sparks bursting into the dim chamber as the soldiers surged forward, their orders no longer hidden beneath polite words. "Take the girl," Thorne shouted. Chaos erupted. Kael fought like a storm given flesh, his movements precise and lethal, even with exhaustion threading through his limbs. Each strike meant not to warn, but to end. 2 soldiers fell before they reached the bed. A third never made it past the threshold. But there were too many of them, and more poured into the chamber with every passing second, their loyalty not to the king, but to the power behind the throne. Leora stumbled back, her body still weak, her mind racing, her heart beginning to pound not in fear alone but in response. That rhythm again. Stronger, faster. Wrong. One of the soldiers broke past Kael's defense and lunged toward her, hand outstretched, blade gleaming. Leora raised her arm instinctively, and the world bent. Not visibly, not violently, but undeniably. The soldier froze, mid-strike, his body locked as if bound by invisible chains, his eyes wide with terror as something unseen pressed down on him, forcing him to his knees. One by one, the others faltered. Not all of them, but enough. Enough for Kael to turn, to see what she had done, and for the first time since the vision, something like awe flickered through the fury in his eyes. "Leora," he said, her name low, almost disbelieving. She did not understand what she had done. She only knew that the moment she reached for control, the world had listened. But Seraphine did not falter. She stepped forward through the chaos, her voice rising sharp and commanding. "Now you see it," she cried. "She is not protecting him, she is binding him. Every moment she grows stronger, his will weakens. If you do not act now, she will take the throne from him without ever lifting a blade." The words struck the soldiers like fire. Doubt turned to fear. Fear turned to action. And once again, they moved. This time, faster. This time, without hesitation. Kael's attention split for a single, fatal heartbeat between defending her and silencing Seraphine, and that was all Thorn needed. He drove forward, blade angled, not at Leora, but at Kael's exposed side. The strike landed. Steel sank into flesh. Kael staggered. The room went silent. For a fraction of a second, even the soldiers froze, as if they had not expected to succeed. As if the idea of the Alpha King bleeding had never fully become real until that moment. Leora's breath stopped. "No," she whispered. Kael dropped to one knee, blood dark against his armor. His hand braced against the floor as the curse flared violently along his throat, reacting to the injury, feeding on the weakness it had been denied for so long. Thorn stepped back, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. "It had to be done," he said, though whether he was speaking to Kael, to Seraphine, or to himself, no one could tell. Seraphine moved closer, her eyes locked on Leora now, not Kael. "Take her," she ordered. Two soldiers advanced. Leora did not move. She could not. Her entire world had narrowed to the sight of Kael kneeling in front of her. Blood on his hands, breath uneven, the weight of 10 years of suffering crashing back onto him all at once. He looked up at her, and in his eyes, there was no command, no order, no claim, only one thing: trust. It was the most dangerous thing he could have given her, because it shattered the last barrier inside her. Her heart thundered. Once, twice. Then the rhythm changed completely. It was no longer human. It was no longer quiet. It was something vast and ancient and uncontainable, something that had been waiting beneath layers of silence and survival for a moment exactly like this. The chamber darkened, not from shadow, from absence of light. Every flame bent inward, every sound collapsed into a single point around her. And when Leora stepped forward, the soldiers did not advance again. They retreated, instinctively, because something in them recognized what their minds could not. The nocturne blood had awakened, fully. The air around her rippled as if time itself hesitated, as if the world were unsure whether to obey her or resist her. And when she reached Kael, kneeling beside him, her hands did not tremble. "Look at me," she said. He did, her palm pressed against his chest. Over the wound, over the curse, over the place where his heart fought to keep him alive. And then she chose, not to control, not to bind, to protect. The rhythm of her heartbeat surged outward, not as a whisper this time, but as a command, a force that wrapped around Kael like a shield woven from something older than magic, something that did not ask permission. The curse screamed, not in sound, in presence. The shadow burst from his throat again, larger this time, more desperate, more violent, clawing against the invisible barrier her power created, trying to reach him, to devour him, to finish what it had been made to do. Leora did not let it. Her eyes lifted. For the first time, they were not soft. They were silver. Ancien. Terrifying. "You will not take him," she said. The words were not loud, but the world heard them. The shadow recoiled. For the first time in 10 years, the curse retreated not because Kael resisted it, but because something stronger had denied it. Silence fell. Absolute. Heavy. Irreversible. The soldiers dropped their weapons. Seraphine stepped back, her face pale. Veilric, who had arrived at the doorway too late to stop what had begun, stared at Leora with something between horror and reverence, because the prophecy he had feared was no longer a possibility. It was standing in front of them, alive, awake, and choosing. Leora lowered her hand slowly, the silver in her eyes fading, her strength draining as quickly as it had risen. Kale's breathing steadied beneath her touch. The curse dimmed, contained once more, but this time it did not feel like a ticking death waiting to claim him. It felt held. She swayed. Kyle caught her before she could fall. The reversal had begun, not in words, not in titles, but in something far more dangerous. The Alpha King, feared by all, was now the one being protected, and the girl they had called nothing had become the most powerful presence in the room, and everyone knew it, which meant the war for the throne was no longer hidden. It had just begun. The silence that followed did not feel like peace. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks the spine of the world. No one in that chamber moved, not the soldiers who had come to seize her, not the council members gathering in the doorway, not even Seraphine, whose perfect composure had finally fractured into something raw and dangerous. They all understood the same truth at once. Power had shifted, and it had not asked for permission. Kale remained on one knee, but it was no longer weakness that held him there. His hand was still wrapped around Leora's waist, steadying her as her strength drained, his other pressed against his side where blood had soaked through his armor. Yet his gaze never left her face, watching the last traces of silver fade from her eyes, watching the impossible settle back into the shape of a girl the world had tried to erase. Something unspoken passed between them then, something that did not need language, because it had already taken root in the space where fear and need had once stood apart. Across the chamber, Valeric found his voice first. It came out quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "The nocturne line," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might break whatever fragile balance still held. It was not destroyed. Seraphine turned on him sharply. "Then you knew this was possible?" Her voice carried accusation, but beneath it lay something deeper, panic, sharpened into anger. "I suspected," Valeric said. "Not this. Never. This." Thorn's hand tightened on his sword hilt again, though he did not raise it. "Then we end it now," he said, "before she grows beyond our control." Kale's head turned slowly toward him. The room seemed to darken without any change in light. "You have already forgotten," Kale said, his voice low, steady, but threaded with something that made even the walls feel tense. "That you serve at my command." Thorn did not lower his gaze. "I serve the throne," he answered. "Not the man who sits on it if that man is compromised." The words fell like a challenge, a declaration, and something close to treason. Leora felt Kale's grip tighten slightly at her waist, not in restraint, but in warning. She understood it without knowing how. He was telling her to stay behind him, to let him handle what came next. But she had already seen what the council was capable of. She had already seen the truth of the curse, and something within her refused to stand behind anyone again. Slowly, despite the weakness still dragging at her limbs, she stepped forward, out from behind him. The movement was small, but every eye followed it. Thorn's expression hardened. "There, you see it?" She steps forward like she belongs at his side. "I do not belong to anyone," Leora said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. It carried. It settled into the room like something inevitable. Seraphine's lips curled faintly. "And yet here you stand, touching the king as though you have the right." Leora met her gaze. "I saved his life," she said simply. The truth of it cut deeper than any insult. Seraphine's composure cracked further, just enough to reveal the fury beneath. "And now, you think that makes you equal?" "No," Leora said. For a moment, Seraphine almost smiled until Leora continued. "It makes me necessary." The word changed everything. Kyle did not correct her, did not silence her, did not remind her of rank or order or place. He let it stand, and that silence was louder than any declaration. Valeric exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with the weight of centuries of knowledge pressing against his thoughts. "If what she says is true," he murmured, then killing her would not free the king from the curse. It would ensure his death. Thorn's jaw clenched. Or free him from her influence. Leora's gaze flickered to him. "You saw it," she said. "The curse tried to take him when he was weak. It does not care about control. It wants him gone." Thorn did not answer. Because he had seen it. They all had. And that was the part no one wanted to admit. Seraphine stepped closer again, her voice lowering, turning softer in a way that made it more dangerous. "Even if that is true," she said, "it does not change what you are. You stand here with power no one understands, tied to a bloodline erased for a reason. Do you think the Pax will accept you? Do you think they will kneel to a girl who cannot even shift?" The words struck where they were meant to. Leora felt it. That old wound, that old doubt, but it did not take hold the way it once would have, because she was no longer standing alone in a circle while they laughed. She was standing in a chamber where the Alpha King had knelt. "Fire, I do not need them to accept me," she said. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Then, what do you need?" Leora hesitated. "Only for a heartbeat." Then she answered the truth she had not allowed herself to name until this moment. "I need him to live." The chamber fell silent again. Not because the words were loud, but because they were undeniable. Kael felt something shift inside his chest at that. Something deeper than the curse, deeper than instinct, something that had nothing to do with power or survival, and everything to do with choice. She had chosen, not because she was bound, not because she was commanded, but because she wanted to. And that was more dangerous than anything the council had feared. Seraphine saw it too. She saw the way Kael looked at Leora. She saw the way he did not interrupt, did not deny, did not reassert control. And in that moment, she understood exactly what she was losing. Not just influence, not just position. Him. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like a blade drawn in a quiet room. "Then, you will die for him." It was not a threat. It was a promise. Leora did not flinch. "If that is what it takes," she said. Kael moved before anyone else could react. He stepped in front of her again, not to hide her, not to silence her, but to stand with her, his presence wrapping around her words, reinforcing them. "No one will die tonight," he said. Thorn scoffed quietly. "You think this ends with a conversation?" "No," Kael replied. His eyes lifted to the gathered council, to the soldiers, to Seraphine. "It ends with a choice." The weight of it settled over the room. "Stand with me," Kael continued, his voice carrying the authority of a king who had survived a decade without sleep and still held the throne. "Or stand against me and answer for it." There it was. No more shadows. No more quiet manipulation. A line drawn openly. Thorn did not hesitate. "I stand with the throne," he said again. Seraphine said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence was answer enough. Veilric closed his eyes briefly, as if mourning something that had not yet fully broken. Then he bowed his head, not deeply, not completely, but enough. "I stand with the truth," he said. Kael's gaze sharpened. "Then you stand with me." The tension did not break. It shifted, moved, realigned. And in that shift, everyone in the room understood the same thing. This was no longer about a slave girl. This was no longer about a curse. This was about power. And the moment it had chosen a new center, Kael turned then, not to the council, not to the soldiers, but to Leora. "Come with me," he said. There was no command in it, only invitation. She looked at him, at the man who had been feared by all, at the king who had fallen asleep at her feet, at the one person in this world whose life now beat in rhythm with her own. And she stepped forward, beside him, not behind. Together, they walked from the chamber, leaving behind a court on the edge of fracture, a council divided between fear and necessity, and enemies who would not wait long before striking again. Because outside those walls, the Pax were already stirring. Rumors would spread. Stories would grow. The king who slept, the girl who silenced death. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the throne, those who had created the curse would not remain still, now that their secret had begun to unravel. The war. that had once been hidden within dreams was about to rise into the waking world. And this time, it would not be fought in silence. They did not stop walking until the doors of the inner sanctum closed behind them, sealing out the noise, the whispers, the shifting loyalties that now crept through every corridor of the palace like a living thing. The chamber Kyle led her into was not a throne room, nor a council hall, nor any place meant for display. It was quieter, older, carved deep within the stone where even the wind seemed to hesitate before entering, as if this place belonged to something more ancient than the crown itself. A fire burned low, casting gold against the dark walls, and for the first time since the chaos began, there was no one watching them. Leora stood near the center of the room, her strength still fragile, her thoughts scattered between what had been revealed and what she now felt rising between them. KL remained by the door for a moment, as though ensuring no one would follow, then slowly turned back toward her. The distance between them was not far, yet it felt vast with everything that now stood unspoken. "You should rest," he said at last, his voice lower here, stripped of the command it carried elsewhere. Leora shook her head faintly. "If I sleep, will it still come for you?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, the firelight catching in his eyes, softening the sharpness that had defined him in every other place. "The curse does not wait for sleep anymore," he said. "Not after what you did. It is watching, waiting." "For me?" she asked. "For both of us." Silence settled again. But this time it was different. Not heavy, not hostile. Something quieter, something aware. Leora lowered her gaze to his side, where blood had darkened his armor. "You're still hurt. It will heal. You said that about the curse too." That stopped him. For a moment, something almost like a breath of humor passed through his expression. Brief, unexpected, gone before it could fully form. Then it faded into something more honest. "You are the only one who has ever argued with me and survived it," he said. "I didn't argue," she replied softly. "I told the truth." He studied her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "You did." The air shifted again, not with magic this time, but with something quieter and more dangerous. The space between them seemed to narrow, not physically, but in the way silence begins to hold meaning when two people stop pretending not to feel it. Kyle reached up slowly and unclasped the heavy armor from his shoulders, letting it fall aside with a dull weight against the stone. Without it, the man beneath the king became more visible, taller than most, stronger than any she had seen, but marked. Scars crossed his chest and arms, some old, some recent, and the dark imprint of the curse coiled faintly at his throat, like a living shadow, waiting to rise again. Leora stepped closer, without realizing she had moved. Her hand lifted, hesitated just above the wound at his side, then gently pressed against it. He inhaled sharply, not from pain, but from something else entirely. The moment her skin touched his, that rhythm returned. Her heartbeat changed again, not violently, not overwhelming, just enough. Kale's eyes closed, for the first time not in fear, but in trust. The room seemed to exhale. "I can feel it," he murmured, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "When you touch me, it's like the noise stops." Leora swallowed softly. "It's not me." "It is." "No," she said, her hand still against him. "It's something inside me, something I don't understand." He opened his eyes then, looking at her not as a mystery, not as a weapon, but as something far more dangerous. "As long as it stays," he said. "I do not need to understand it." Her breath caught. The words were simple, but what they meant was not. She felt it then, the edge of something deeper forming between them. Not sudden, not overwhelming, something slow, inevitable, threading itself through every glance, every touch, every moment they chose not to turn away. "You said I should fear you," she whispered. "You should." "I don't," she said. That was the moment everything changed. Kyle went still, not because he doubted her, because he believed her, and that belief unsettled something in him far more than defiance ever had. "You will," he said. But there was no certainty in it now. Leora shook her head faintly. "No. I've seen what you are when no one is watching. His gaze sharpened slightly. And what am I? She hesitated, searching for a word that would not sound like weakness, because she knew he would reject that. Tired, she said finally. The word struck deeper than any blade. For a moment, Kea looked away. No one had ever named that part of him. No one had been allowed to. Yet she had seen it, without trying, without asking, without fear. When he looked back at her, something in his expression had shifted, something unguarded, something that made the space between them feel fragile and dangerously close to breaking. You see too much, he said quietly. You hide too much, she answered. A faint breath left him almost a laugh, but not quite. And then, without warning, the connection between them deepened, not through touch, not through words, through something older. Kyle's wolf stirred beneath his skin, rising not in dominance, not in threat, but in recognition. His gaze dropped to her throat, where her pulse moved beneath her skin, steady, powerful, calling to something instinctive, something primal. Leora felt it too. The shift, the pull, her own body responding in a way she could not explain. Her heartbeat sinking, not exactly matching his, but aligning with him, as if the rhythm inside her had been waiting for something to answer it. The bond was not complete, but it was forming, dangerously, slowly, inevitably. KL stepped back first, not out of rejection, out of control. This should not happen, he said. Why? Because anything that binds you to me will put you in danger. Leora held his gaze. I was already in danger, she said. Before you. That truth left no room for argument. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. It will be worse now. Then I will be stronger. The certainty in her voice unsettled him again. Not because it was foolish, because it was real. He moved closer once more, slower this time, as if aware of the line they were both approaching. You do not understand what they will do, he said. The council, the nobles, Seraphine. I don't need to, she replied. I understand what you will do. And what is that? You won't let them hurt me. The words settled between them like a vow neither had spoken aloud. Kyle did not deny it. He could not, because it was already true. Before he had chosen it, before he had admitted it. It had already begun. His hand lifted, almost unconsciously, brushing lightly against her cheek. Not a claim, not a command, but something softer, something that felt as if it belonged to a life he had never been allowed to live. Leora did not pull away. For the first time in her life, she leaned into it. Just slightly, just enough. The moment stretched. Fragile, dangerous, unavoidable. Then, a pulse. Not from her, not from him, from the bond. The room darkened at the edges, the fire flickering violently as something beneath the surface of the curse reacted not with attack, but with awareness. It had felt them. It had felt the connection forming, and it did not like it. Kyle's hand dropped instantly, his body tensing as the marks on his throat flared again, darker than before, the shadow beneath his skin shifting violently as if something inside it had awakened fully. It's reacting, he said, voice tightening. To us, Leora whispered. The truth struck them both at once. The curse was not just a parasite. It was aware. And now, it knew her. Kyle stepped back, pulling himself away from her with visible effort, his breathing uneven as he fought to contain the surge of power rising within him. This is why it cannot happen, he said more sharply now. The closer you are to me, the more we'll fight to break you. Leora shook her head. No, she said. He looked at her. Frustration and something else, fear flashing through his eyes. You saw what it did, he said. It tried to drag you into it, and I stopped it, she replied. Silence. Steady. Unshaken. She stepped forward again, closing the distance he had created. I'm not afraid of it, she said. You should be. I'm not. Her hand found his again. This time, she did not hesitate. This time, she chose it. The moment their fingers intertwined, the bond pulsed, stronger, brighter, deeper, threading itself between them in a way that no longer felt like coincidence. Kale inhaled sharply. Leora. But she didn't let go. Then don't push me away, she said softly. Not when we both know it won't change anything. He held her gaze. Fought it. Lost. Because for the first time in 10 years, Kyle Varkai was not fighting to survive. He was fighting something far more dangerous. The desire to stop, to rest, to stay with her. And slowly, inevitably, he stopped resisting. His hand tightened around hers, not as a king, not as a command, as a man who had finally found something worth risking everything for. And somewhere deep within the curse, something ancient shifted. Not retreating, not breaking, but preparing. Because the closer they became, the more violently it would try to tear them apart. And the more it did, the stronger their bond would grow. Until one of them broke. Or the curse did. The night did not last. It shattered. Not with thunder, not with war horns, but with a silence so absolute it felt like the world itself had drawn breath and refused to release it. The fire in the chamber guttered low, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls as something deep beneath the palace began to stir, not in secret anymore, not in whispers, but in awakening. Kale felt it first. The curse did not surge. It rose. Not as pain, as presence. Ancient, aware, furious. His grip tightened around Leora's hand as the marks along his throat ignited, not flickering as before, but burning with a darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. His body stiffened, breath catching as something inside him pushed outward with a force that no longer resembled restraint. "It's here," he said, his voice strained, low. Leora did not pull away. Her heartbeat answered, not gently this time, powerfully. The rhythm surged through her veins, through their connection, spreading into the space between them like a living current. She felt the presence rising inside him, clawing toward the surface, no longer content to remain hidden, no longer satisfied with feeding in silence. "It wants you," she whispered. Kael's eyes darkened, gold burning at the edges. "No," he said. "It wants us both." The walls trembled. A crack split through the stone beneath their feet, running like a vein of shadow across the chamber floor. From it, darkness bled upward. Not smoke, not flame, but something heavier, thicker, as if night itself had been given form and was forcing its way into the waking world. Far beyond the chamber, the palace erupted into chaos. Guards shouted. Steel rang. Somewhere, Seraphine's voice cut through the noise, commanding, sharp, driving the council's final move into motion. This was not coincidence. This was their last attempt. They had not simply awakened the curse. They had prepared for this moment. "They're using it," Kale said, realization cutting through the fury. "They're trying to force it to break free while I'm weakened." Leora shook her head, her grip tightening around his hand. "You're not weakened." The darkness surged higher, forming a shape taller than any man, broader than any beast, its outline shifting between shadow and something far more monstrous. It had no true face, yet it watched them. It had no voice, yet it pressed against their minds like a scream held just beneath the surface. The true form of the curse, no longer hidden, no longer restrained. It moved toward them. Kyle stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between it and Leora, his body already preparing to fight something no blade could cut. "Stay behind me." "No." The word stopped him. Leora stepped beside him. "Not behind. Never again." The bond between them pulsed, stronger now, brighter, no longer uncertain, no longer forming. It was there. Undeniable, woven between them with threads neither of them could sever. "You can't fight this alone," she said. "I won't let it touch you." "It already has," she replied. But it didn't win. The shadow surged. Faster. Violent. It struck, not at Kale, at the space between them, at the bond. The impact tore through the chamber like a silent explosion, driving them apart, breaking their grip, slamming Kale back against the stone as the curse lashed around him, coiling, tightening, dragging him toward the ground. Coil. Leora moved instantly, but the darkness surged again, forming a barrier between them, a wall of living shadow that pulsed with every beat of his weakening control. "You cannot save him," the presence pressed into her mind. Not spoken. Known. "He belongs to me." Leora's breath shook. Fear rose. Old fear. The kind that had once kept her silent, still, obedient. But it did not take root. Not anymore. He chose me, she said. The darkness recoiled slightly. Not from the words, from the truth in them. Kale's voice broke through the strain. Rough, barely controlled. Leora, don't. She stepped forward, into the shadow. Pain tore through her instantly, not physical, not entirely, but deeper, older, as if the darkness were trying to unravel her, to strip away whatever made her different, whatever allowed her to stand against it. Her knees nearly gave, but she did not fall. Her heartbeat rose, stronger, louder. The rhythm filled the chamber, pushing against the shadow, not with force, but with presence, steady, unyielding, impossible to silence. I'm not afraid of you, she said. The darkness lashed out, wrapping around her wrist, her arm, pulling her deeper, trying to drag her into the same endless void it had trapped Kale within for 10 years. You should be. Her vision blurred. For a moment, she saw nothing but darkness, felt nothing but cold, heard nothing but silence. Then, a memory. Not hers. His. Kale, younger, alone, screaming into the void as the curse consumed his sleep, his mind, his strength. Years of it, endless, unbroken. Her breath hitched, not in fear, in understanding. You've been alone, she whispered. The shadow faltered. Just for a second. You're not supposed to be this, she said, her voice softening, not in weakness, but in something far more dangerous compassion. The darkness recoiled again, more violently this time. Stop, it pressed, but she stepped deeper, through it, into it. Her hand reached forward, not to strike, to touch, and when her palm pressed against the core of the shadow, everything stopped. Time, sound, breath. Her heartbeat changed, fully, completely, no longer human, no longer restrained. The full power of the nocturne bloodline awakened not as destruction, not as domination, but as something older than both. Balance. Light did not burst outward. Darkness did not vanish. Instead, the two met, aligned. Her heartbeat wrapped around the curse, not fighting it, not breaking it, but containing it, reshaping it, forcing it into harmony with something it had never known. Choice. The shadow trembled, faltered, changed. Kyle felt it instantly, the pressure inside him shifting, not clawing, not tearing, but settling, as if something that had been screaming for years had finally been heard. His body went still, not in exhaustion, in release. Leora. His voice was barely a breath. The shadow shrank, collapsed inward, drawn into her hand, then into him, then into the space between them where the bond now burned brighter than anything else in the room. The curse did not disappear. It became something else, controlled, bound, silent. The chamber fell still. The cracks in the stone stopped spreading. The fire steadied, and Leora staggered. Kyle moved before she could fall. He caught her, pulling her against him, his arms tightening around her as if letting go would undo everything they had just fought for. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because the bond between them had completed, fully, irrevocably. His breath steadied against her hair. It's gone, he said. She shook her head faintly against his chest. No, it's with us. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. You're not afraid of that? No, she said softly. Because you're not alone anymore. The words settled into him deeper than any victory, deeper than any crown. Outside, the doors to the chamber burst open. This time, it was not guards. It was the entire council. Seraphine at the front, Veilric behind Hair, Thorn, wounded but standing. They froze the moment they saw him. Standing, alive, the curse no longer burning. Leora in his arms. Something in the room changed instantly. Power, clear, undeniable. Kale did not step back, did not release her. He turned slowly to face them, his arms still wrapped around her, his presence no longer driven by survival but by certainty. It's over, he said. Seraphine's lips parted slightly. That's not possible. It is, he replied. Her gaze shifted to Leora, sharp, searching, desperate to find weakness. She found none. Then she has bound you completely, Seraphine said, her voice tightening. Kale's expression did not change. No, he said. And then, he did something no Alpha King had ever done before. He stepped forward, pulled Leora with him, and said, clearly, for every person in that chamber to hear, I chose her. Silence. Absolute. Irreversible. She is not my weakness, Kale continued. She is my equal. The words struck harder than any war declaration. Seraphine staggered back half a step. Thorn lowered his blade. Veilric bowed his head fully this time, because the choice had been made. Publicly. Completely. Irrevocably. Kale turned to Leora then, his gaze softening in a way no one in that room had ever witnessed. Stay, he said. Not as a command. As a question. Leora looked at him, at the man who had survived 10 years without sleep, at the king who had fallen at her feet, at the one who had chosen her. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. And she answered, yes. The bond pulsed. Varm. Steady. Unbreakable. Outside, the palace would take time to bend. The packs would whisper. The world would resist. But none of that mattered, because the Alpha King no longer stood alone, and the girl they had once called nothing now stood beside him. Not as a slave, not as a secret, but as the one who had silenced death itself and chosen to stay.